Google Ads campaign strategies change very frequently, and staying on top of the latest changes gives you a huge advantage over your competitors while also massively increasing your return on ad spend. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you my 5 newest Performance Max campaign strategies that you need to be using right now and taking advantage of while they're still working. The first strategy is called the feed-only approach. Now, in a lot of my other PMax videos, I've mentioned this strategy where you are supposed to force your PMax campaign to only function as a shopping campaign only, and it's entirely possible. I still do it not only for my own brands but also for client brands under my Google Ads agency or marketing. And this is one such example. This is a client's e-commerce brand. It's a furniture store based in Texas, but we run Google Ads for it as well. And this PMax campaign is actually following just that approach. If we now go on over to asset groups, we can see that there are no assets provided and there's no audience signals provided, which is this first approach. The way it works is fairly simple. You're not supposed to be adding any images or any descriptions, logos, headlines, etc., nor should you be adding any audience signals. And the main purpose of this kind of approach is to fully set the algorithm free, is to fully set the campaign free to now go out and not only show only those products so that it's a shopping only campaign, but also not to limit the campaign performance further by adding a bunch of unnecessary audience signals. If you add a bunch of assets to it, it no longer becomes a shopping only PMax campaign. Now it is forced to be a YouTube campaign, a Gmail campaign, a discovery campaign, a remarketing campaign, etc. And if your main goal is to test all of these things, they should be tested separately in their own campaigns, not via a Performance Max campaign. Next, I want to address my second strategy, the PMax campaign with audience signals. Despite being a feed only campaign, the only difference here is now we're actually giving it audience signals to go after. But the make it or break it with this approach is the kinds of audiences that you use. And I really like to apply this strategy for the accounts where maybe it's a newer account or maybe the account does not have strong enough data. This approach really comes in handy in these kinds of situations. And this e-commerce brand, which is my e-commerce brand, is where we're applying this exact strategy. And surprisingly, this approach is the one that's working the best. I mean, if we look at the last 30 days or so, asset group 1 is where that approach is applied at the moment, and it's running at a 4.39x ROAS, which in this situation, it's a very profitable approach and overall campaign as a whole. The way it works is specifically with the audience signals, you want to be only choosing your audience signals, which are more of the retargeting basis audience signals. So none of the actual age groups, none of the interest or cold traffic interest targeting. Rather, you're going to be only kind of narrowing down to 3 separate types of audiences. The first one, which we'll see here, is the cart abandoned audience. You can add the time range to be as extreme as possible. I like to go to the max date range that's possible. Next one is all visitors. Now, if you run a niche store, this comes extremely in handy because now you're directly targeting those people which already have some type of interest to go with when it comes to your brand. And the third one is people who have already converted and purchased. Now, you want to set these on an observation basis so that this campaign is not just narrowing down to only these audiences. And the reason why we do that is because, or I want to force this campaign at least to use this data within these audiences and to observe them and to get more people similar to them. So this is the only approach where this is viable to add these audience signals, but you want to keep it short, maybe 2 to 3 or maximum 4, and keep them on a retargeting basis. But this directly now brings me to the third approach, the assets plus no signals approach. It's very similar to the first approach. The only difference is now with this approach, we're actually providing assets, but we're not providing any types of audience signals. So with this approach, it would be something very similar to this approach right here, where you have a bunch of assets provided, you have a bunch of logos, headlines, etc. But when it comes to the audience signals, you have no audience signals provided. So here, there's actually one audience signal only, and it's a keyword-based audience signal, which is this brand's URL itself. But for your situation, for this third approach, I would not even have this at all. And the way this works is now, without the audience signals, this campaign is forced to showcase all these assets to a very broad audience, which it personally team believes is the right audience along with those products. And this strategy really works well when you don't have a lot of reach or your overall keyword search volume is fairly low and you want to kind of increase the overall search volume, you want to increase the traffic, but you know it's not really possible as a whole. Here is where this approach shines the most, because now these assets force this PMX campaign to show on 6 different placements along with shopping, but at the same time, you're not limiting the campaign further by providing these unnecessary audiences. So now it can really act as a very broad campaign and a broad strategy and go reach the right audience, which the campaign algorithm believes is the right way to go about it. The fourth and final approach on my list is the assets plus signals approach. Pretty self-explanatory. You're just adding a bunch of assets to it. And when I say a bunch, you want to make sure you're adding a realistic and ideal assets, not just a bunch of random assets. You could approach this various different ways, such as adding only a retargeting audience to the audience signals, or maybe adding certain keywords for your competitors along with the audience signals for your own brand and retargeting as well. This brings us now to the actual final approach, and this is the signal mix and match approach. Essentially, what you will be doing with this approach, which is exactly what was done with this brand, is only changing up the audience signals. So for this brand, what they figured out is these kinds of assets work the best. So instead of now playing around with assets further, they added more audience signals. They changed up the audience signals each and made it different for each asset group. This fifth approach is like a combination of the first 4, but in order for that to be successful, you need to first figure out what the winning approach is from the first 4 audience signals. But if you're currently doing $40,000 or more per month in revenue and you need just a little bit of extra help scaling your brand to the next level, go onto my website at yourmarketing.com and book a free call with me to see how we can potentially work together and make that happen. But I do want you to watch this video right here, which will help you triple your ROAS with Google Ads, so that this approach here can actually add on top of the ROAS and make sure that you're testing these things profitably. This video right here will help you triple that ROAS, so you're so profitable that when you're testing these 4-5 different approaches out, you're not going in a loss.